When it comes to Komi Can't Communicate, I freaking love this anime so much. And this anime in Komi, it truly continues to be something that's very special and not often seen in anime. Like, I really think that if you group anime of a similar subtext, of a similar kind of like storytelling, the way it's a very small group of anime that do what Komi Can't Communicate does, and does it really well. In episode number 7 of part 2, or I guess episode 19, whichever way you're counting, but in this episode not only got me to laugh the hardest I think I've laughed all season, with the first piece of the story that it had to tell, with Komi trying to set Najime on the right direction for her hand holding with Tadano. Like, that whole entire scene, like, I was rolling and laughing and just like having a great time watching it. Just watching Komi just freaking stress the F out, trying to figure out how to rectify this situation, and watching her rip up the paper when she was like, I'm just deflecting, I'm making excuses, and she ends up just writing, I was checking his pulse, and she gives that letter to Najime, and then that's it. Like, that whole entire freak out scene, like, I was just rolling and laughing. And that's how the episode starts. And then the episode decides to kind of flip the script, and it ends, right? So the episode ends with Komi talking, right? And her actually verbalizing and like actually speaking are rare occurrences in the anime. Like, you could probably put every single scene of her talking together, and we're probably talking somewhere between 4 to 8 scenes of her, speaking, whether it's the first conversation on the phone with Tadano, whether it was the other time she talked to Tadano, whether it's always Tadano, right? But we can kind of put those different times in together, and they're very small and they're special. And in this episode, she's talked the most that she's ever talked, so much so that she was able to tell us a very grueling and emotional story for her. And I think everybody can really sympathize with being extremely nervous, not being able to say what you want to say, going along with the punches, right? Like, there might be a certain situation that you have found yourself in, much like I have in the past, to where maybe I wanted to stand up and say, no, this is not what I want to do, but I just kind of went with it because I couldn't figure out how to verbalize it without coming off sounding a certain way. And in Komi's case, she just couldn't verbalize anything because it was just very difficult for her, especially when it comes to people she's not familiar with, when it comes to strangers, considering that the predicament that she was put in middle school, with basically everybody kind of like looking at her like the fourth or fifth wheel, and being that kid at the end of, like when you're about to do dodgeball and like the last kid is there, like being that specific person is always very difficult. It's always awkward for that kid. And this is the same situation that happened to her, which is very traumatizing and emotional. And she verbalized that trauma to Tadano to not only tell him the story, but then tell him what her fear is of having something similar happen again. We're saying like, hey, I'm not, and it's not true, right? This specific situation is not true, but she doesn't want to be someone else third or fourth, or like, oh, we'll just take her choice. She wants to be somebody's first choice. And I think everybody can really like get on that level, saying like, oh yeah, I always want to be somebody's first choice. Now, you might be the most popular kid's 12th, 50th choice, but like you might have like your certain 1 or 2 or 3 friends who are like, oh yeah, you're their first choice. You're each other's first choice. And obviously the end is very endearing and sincere. And when it comes time, everybody in the class was like, yo, Komi's our first choice. And then everybody else kind of follows suit. So obviously her worry versus reality are drastically different, but she was able to still verbalize that concern with Tadano, which indicates her growth, indicates how far she's come, indicates her ability, even though like she only is able to actually communicate and speak to Tadano, like that's a huge like leaps and bounds over any progress she could have had. I'm sure it's leaps and bounds over what she could have ever imagined. Then the other thing that she has in high school that she didn't have in middle school is nobody understood. She was completely misunderstood. This poor girl. She was completely misunderstood in high school. She was completely misunderstood in middle school, and nobody gave a shit or took the time or took the effort to try and see what was going on with her. Obviously, now it's a different story. Tadano did. He cracked that shell, and now everybody understands how she communicates, right? Everybody understands that. And because everybody has that understanding, they're not put off when she can't verbalize something. They're like, oh, it's okay. Or they'll get Tadano as her translator, or Najime to help, or tell her to write it. And they're okay with that. So she has now a plethora of people around her who are supportive as opposed to judgmental. And that is like, it's awesome. It's awesome to see. And those situations happen in real life. And it's just a beautiful thing to see animated. And I think it's awesome. Then, like I said, you put on top of everything else the hilarious ass scene you had. And then you follow that up with an even more hilarious. Well, I think the first part was that was my comedy stuff. But then you hit Mr. Bangs, the narcissist guy. And him, I love his inner monologue versus reality. And I love the kid who translates his inner monologue to everybody else. Well, specifically you and I, the viewer. And I love that narcissist dude. And I love how he got rejected and settled for Tadano's number. And I love how he was texting Tadano's sexy ass pictures. Like that's some shit. I'm gonna leave you guys on that thought there. Another sweet ass episode of Komi Can't Communicate. Another really funny, endearing, and sweet and sincere, and just it's so good. This anime is just special. Komi's special, and I think anybody who dropped it, the anime just might be misunderstood. And I know I use that word a lot, but it's like if somebody dropped it, it's probably because they just didn't get it or understand what it's going for. But I think the things that it's going for, I think it absolutely nails it. All right, I'm leaving you guys on that thought there. Let me know what you guys thought about this episode down in the comments below. As always, I appreciate you being here for another week. Make sure you guys hit me with the big old like before you dip out, and I'll see you guys next week. Peace.